again, everybody. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa with the beautiful Brice. It's not Monday, it's not Wednesday, it's tremendous Tuesday. We're on holiday. You can see I've been on the beach the whole day. Got my costume underneath here. The weather's been fantastic. So the holiday makers are very, very grateful. And I want to say Merry Christmas to everybody. I hope you've had a wonderful, wonderful time with your families and still are having a beautiful time with your families, your friends, your loved ones. It's really just a wonderful time of connecting and being together. And talking about being together, I'm very happy to have Brice together with us again today because it's holiday time and usually everyone's traveling, and I've caught you between trips as well, Brice. Welcome. How are you, honey? How's the holiday going?
I'm still slightly hungover. I have to admit that. You know, when you follow such a strict regiment with, I eat very clean. I don't drink. I'm not opposed to alcohol, but when you're practicing yoga every day of your life, it really doesn't work. So whenever a holiday comes around and I do allow myself the freedom to eat heavier foods and drink some alcohol, I usually pay for it for a couple of days post-holiday. That's okay. It's fine. Yes, I'm traveling tomorrow, so it's kind of cool to be able to do a show in between the day where we normally film.
Yeah, I know. Well, lovely to catch you in between. So, but seriously happy about today's topic, though, although it's quite a heavy one as well, which is the 1899 child strikes of New York, which is amazing because when we were doing our Tartaria stuff a couple of months ago, we did sort of cover one of the chapters or one of the episodes we covered was the children, the adoptions, these babies that suddenly orphans, rather than adoptions, these babies that suddenly came out of nowhere. Very, very interesting topic. And especially since the topic of kids is so hot on our lips at the moment, with all of the what's going on in the world right now. We know that kids are their currency. And from what we are revealing now, this has been going on for a very, very long time. We know that. I mean, look, all we got to do is go back to the early times of biblical times, especially. You see these gods throwing babies and sacrificing babies into the burning fires and stuff like this. So this has been going on since the beginning of time, really. The thing is, most people are unaware that it's still going on. I was speaking to someone the other day and saying to me, yeah, but that was hundreds of years ago. I'm going, no, it's now more prevalent than ever because they got away with it so frequently and so easily.
The Tartarian guy is very firm that he believes that the Bible is actually only a couple hundred years old. So that speaks volumes because and we're going to talk a little bit about one of the missing books of the Bible here in a second, because yes, I actually, a few days ago, as I was like cleaning or something, I was listening to a podcast of somebody who had survived a fundamentalist cult, Christian cult. And it was interesting because this woman had like gone the complete opposite way, where now she is a total atheist, which from my perspective, I don't blame her because of the trauma she's been through. Like, I get it. But part of her waking up was really doing a deep dive study into the Bible and how she realized that the God they taught as being this like benevolent, loving creator was not the same God that was written about in the Bible. The God that was written about in the Bible was a bloodthirsty, psychotic, demanding blood rituals, all that kind of stuff. And I've pointed that out, and we've pointed that out, Shanti, that Lucifer is the God of the Bible. Lucifer very much is the God of the Bible. And, for me, uncovering all these things has only strengthened my faith, has made me have a stronger belief system, because I see this as a spiritual war. It always has been a spiritual war. And when
have you ever read or come across Neil Donald Walsh's books, Conversations with God?
I've heard of them.
Those books came to me in the early 2000s, I have to say. And I want to tell you, it was an amazing read for me because it's like in there, I mean, he obviously is channeling who he says is God, and he was a staunch Catholic. So everything in his channeling, basically, God debases in terms of what the Catholic Church's teachings were. You know, like being in limbo and all sorts of things like that. And one of the things he speaks about there is that God says to him, "I never ever gave you commandments." He says, "I gave you 10 commitments from God." So then he goes on to talk about what those commitments are. And I actually don't, I mean, I've got the book here, but it's actually very, very interesting because to start turning that religious dogma into something and just giving it a twist, if you will, and you bring some light onto it. And suddenly it's a very, very different understanding that we're getting from that. So it's true. I mean, I do believe the Bible was definitely created as a tool for suppression for men and women.
Or yes, it's for the controllers to, there's many different tools of indoctrination, and this story alone is going to cover 2 tools of indoctrination. That's going to be religion and academia and academics. And I get it. I mean, I'm college educated. I know that's a lot of money. It's a lot of time to put forth towards a degree. I get it. To all of a sudden have a PhD in history and learn that everything you learned is a crock of shit. Like, I get how that cognitive dissonance can start to set in. And then sometimes academia itself can almost be like its own religion, just like science can kind of be its own religion. But we're going to talk, and I will say too, the missing books of the Bible that I've been able to read myself basically completely destroy the Bible. So the canonical Bible, the canonized Bible, is very much heavily edited. That's not speculation. That's not opinion. That is fact. It has been edited. You can go and read all the changes that were made at these different ecclesiastical councils. You can even go and read where they had the huge debacle where they removed reincarnation. That was when the church was divided between the Western and Eastern sides. The Orthodox went, and they went this huge debacle where they were warring each other to take out reincarnation. And why? Why would they take out reincarnation? Because if people don't believe in reincarnation, then they're more vulnerable. There's more of a fear of death. And Absolutely. So it was a political campaign. And Yeshua, who is what people call Jesus, Jesus was a name that was created by the controllers. The name Jesus actually means Hail Satan. That's what it means. So they're making a mockery out of you when you use that name. His name was Yeshua ben Yosef. Yeshua does not translate to Jesus. Yeshua translates to Joshua. Okay, and Magdalene was also the Christ. The original Jewish prophecy was that there would be 2 of them, not 1. The Christians went and changed history, which is what narcissists and psychopaths do. They rewrite history to prove their point. So they rewrote history. Yeah? There were 2 of them. Magdalene and Yeshua, a man and a woman, the representative of both sides of both genders. And Magdalene
man and female, yeah. Can't be any otherwise if you think. It can't be another way. Can't be another way.
And Magdalene was actually the first to figure it out. She woke Yeshua up, which makes sense to me because women usually figure it out first. And in the Magdalene manuscript, she talks about the scene where Jesus, or Yeshua, is taking the 7 demons off of her. Well, it's comical because she says that's not what happened. He was healing my 7 chakras, and I healed his in return. We healed each other. It was the 7 chakras. So, it's kind of comical to actually go and read some of these things and to read. But anyway, just to get back, so I want you guys to understand there's a lot of information in the missing books of the Bible. And if you look for the missing books of the Bible, and this is what true research is, I want to reiterate this because the school system, and we're going to get into that with the Federal Reserve, because I think the child strike of 1899 had a lot to do with the creation of the Federal Reserve. And I'll tell you why at the end of this story. But true research is being able to look at all these different ideas, all these different theories, and use critical thinking skills to figure out for yourself the theory you think as what happened. And that's what I've done with this story, because I have the information from Tartaria, I have the information from the event that happened, and I also have the information from the missing books of the Bible. But before we get into the Apocryphon of John, I just want to give you guys some statistics. So from 1854 to 1929, 500,000 orphans resettled under the orphan train movement. So these were the orphan trains from 1854 to 1929. This is a hell of a long period of time to be moving orphans on trains out to the Midwest to settle the Midwest. Why would they need to send orphans out to the Midwest to settle the Midwest if we already had people out in the Midwest settling it anyway? Because history is an effing lie, and there was a mud flood, and they had to repopulate people. In the 19th century, so the 1800s, the Institute of Children, Poverty, and Homelessness. So there was an institution created of children, poverty, and homelessness in the 18th century. And in the 1870s, this institution said that 20 to 30,000 kids lived on the streets of New York City. 20 to 30,000 kids were street kids, which are the kids we're going to talk about in this story. This Institute of Child Poverty and Homelessness created what they called Homes for Friendliness. That's what they were titled. These were asylums. And we're going to talk about that as well in this story too. These were asylums where they would send children. So these kids living on the streets, these street kids, were working in the factories. They were hawking the news. They were working. They were supporting themselves at 8, 9, 10 years old. But if they started to get unmanageable or unruly or started to push back against their master's authority, they would send them to these asylums. This was like a juvie jail, right? But they called them the homes for friendliness. 90% of the children sent to these asylums did not survive them. Okay? 90% of these children who were working were born into the harshest of circumstances. The labor mills where they were working were extremely dangerous, and they survived those, but they couldn't survive these asylums. That tells you something right there. All right. There was also
do we have any information actually of what happened in the asylums, or is it, I mean, obviously for them not to survive?
Roughly, they talk about it and we're going to get into the movie of Newsies in the play where they talk about these asylums, and it's brought up that how rough they are and how the kids like fear these asylums the most. I would assume, if I had to guess, I would assume that probably half of the deaths of these children were due to probably abuse, starvation, just not being treated, sicknesses, and probably some of them were used for probably rituals, I would assume. You know, they also had, and this made me want, this disgusted me. When I was doing my research, I found the Lost Children's Room at Mulberry Street Police Station. This was established in 1864 in New York. So if these ruffian kids were getting out of hand, another place they would take these kids was to this particular police station where they had what they called the sky parlor. And so kids were thrown into these sky parlors, the Lost Children's Room, where they would be sit and basically be on display like zoo animals. And adults could come look at them like they were a spectacle, which also tells me, same with the incubator babies, a lot of these adults did not know what children looked like, so they just wanted to come see what a child looked like in a closer habitat. Or you could come shopping for a kid at the police station. So adults could come to this children's room at Mulberry State Police Station in 1864, and if they could come and pick out a kid they wanted. Like they're in the grocery store picking out a loaf of bread or an apple or a pear, what kid they wanted to bring home with them. Now, some of these people might have been very fine citizens that could have just adopted a kid. It could have turned out really well, but I don't know. I just thought that was effing wild when I saw that. I was like, and a lot of this stuff, guys, I'm going to say this because this is going to come into this child strike. So when you do research into the child strike of 1899, the first information you're going to be shown on a Google search is the controller information, the Wikipedias, the stuff like that, where they are controlling it. They're kind of rewriting the history. And they will tell you that these children were children of immigrants. They were poor immigrant children. If you keep going, and you go into archive back throughout decades past and read articles, they say nothing about these kids being immigrants, and very much that these were orphaned children. They were street kids. They did not have homes. Half of these children who participated in this child strike were so poor that they did not even own a jacket to be able to hawk newspapers in the freezing New York weather. Some of the pictures, I think I sent you guys some pictures, but if you guys Google it, these kids were badasses. You see them chain smoking cigarettes. There was a story that the kids oftentimes would save up their money at the end of the day, and they would go to the pharmacy and they would buy a line of cocaine to do at night just to help them.
From the pharmacy, these kids are able to buy cocaine from the pharmacy.
Well, that's where, because Coca-Cola, where I'm from in Atlanta, that's where Coca-Cola is from, and Coca-Cola is called Coca-Cola because it used to have cocaine in it. And you would go to the soda jerk shops, which were in pharmacies, and they would create the drink for you here in Atlanta. If you're ever in Atlanta, you can go to the World of Coke Museum, which is a museum we have, and they show you the old soda jerk, how they would do in the pharmacies. So these soda jerks were in the actual pharmacies, and that is where they would go and buy a line of cocaine. These kids, which I don't blame them. It's, if you know anything about the history of the cocoa leaf, the Native Americans, there are some of those kids. The Native Americans would use the cocoa leaf to be able to stimulate energy without being hungry to continue to work. If anybody knows the jokes about cocaine, your Coke skinny, Coke heads get really skinny. Right? So, because it curbs your appetite. So that made sense to me. I mean, look how young these kids are, guys. These are like 8-year-old children. I mean, barefoot. These are not immigrant children. These were not children who had parents. Okay? In my opinion, these were incubator babies. They were created by and we're going to see some of their names too. And if some of their names are fantastic, you can definitely tell the kids name themselves. So let me to also talk a little bit about the Apocryphon of John before we get into this. I know we've spoken about this briefly before, but the Apocryphon of John is one of the missing books of the Bible. The word apocryphon means secret teaching or hidden teaching. Now, I don't believe that this book was ever, when it was being utilized and it wasn't banned, I don't think they called it the Apocryphon of John. I think that the controllers labeled it that because there's a lot of information in this book that has to do, once you start to see the Tartarian evidence, you go, oh, that's why they call it Apocryphon. Here's the secret teaching. So basically in the Apocryphon of John, there's a lot of stuff that in this, they talk about Sophia, the feminine side of God, all that kind of stuff. But there's a section where they talk about Yeldabaoth, these kids. Yes. And actually that's the thing that there's also evidence that the first slaves in America were not Black people, but were Irish white children.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not covering that, which would lead more into the incubator babies. They were Irish white children, were the first slaves in the United States of America, or the colonies. It was in the United States, according to the historical timeline that they give us. So in the Apocryphon of John, the character of Lucifer is called Yeldabaoth. And what Yeldabaoth does, we know in the canonized Bible, in the Old Testament, God says, I'm a jealous God. You shall have no other gods before me. Well, this comes from Yeldabaoth. This comes from the Apocryphon of John, where Yeldabaoth is so jealous of God, of source God, that he creates humanoid beings that mimic, that look exactly like the humanoid beings that God has created. The only difference is when he creates these humanoid beings, they don't do anything. They just sit there kind of slumped over like a marionette without a hand or a puppet, because they don't have the spark of life. The darkness can't create anything. It can only mimic something or invert it. It can't create anything. So Yeldabaoth created these bodies that mimicked the bodies that God had created, but the bodies had no life in them because Yeldabaoth could not give life to them. Only thing that could give life to them was God. And so that spirit of life is put into these bodies through God, through how God kind of steps in and intervenes. And so this to me was like ding, 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 ding. I studied the Apocryphon of John a long time before I ever learned about Tartaria. And then when I learned about the incubator babies, I remembered all of the research I had done into the Apocryphon of John and the story of Yeldabaoth. And I was like, oh, they're telling us that's why this book got banned. and why it got labeled apocryphon or secret teaching, because this is a secret that the controllers, they have to tell us somehow, but they can't come out and tell us because that's how they feel like they get around karma, right? And if we look, and once we start to see these things, we start to see the evidence of this all around us. So that everybody watching right now might actually be familiar with the child strike of 1899, whether you know it or not. In 1992, there was a movie that was created called Newsies. Now, I know that somebody said in my comment section that they thought it was the Mandela effect because they realized it was called Newsboys. In your country, it might have been called Newsboys, but in America, it was called Newsies. Now, this movie starred Christian Bale, who we know is part of the club, or we assume is part of the club, but he was a young in 1992. It also had Bill Pullman in it. And it covered the story of this children's strike. They've since gone on to make a Broadway play. That was a Tony Award-winning Broadway play in 2012. I have watched the Broadway play multiple times now. I've been studying it. It's a musical. The both movie and the play are musicals, and it's high energy. It's high dancing, obviously, because you have, especially in the Broadway play, you have 35-year-old men playing children, and it's high aerobics. Yes, there was a children's crusade. Yes, absolutely. It's high aerobics, high gymnastics, but of course it is because that's the energy of the children, right? Energy, or kids, especially young boys, are high energy. Now, the movie and the play make it seem like these kids were like 15, 16, 17 years old. No, they were like 8. They were like 8 years old when they did this. So let's talk about what was going on. So after we hear all these statistics, we have all these children in New York City that don't have parents. They're not orphans. They're called orphans, but they literally don't. And if you go back and study the Disney is the one that released the play and the movie. And I think Disney really told us a lot of truth disguised as entertainment. Okay. Because you see in the lyrics, you see in the dialogue, they talk about not having any clue who their parents are. And there is one scene where one of the kids does have parents and is helping. And the guy goes, "Oh, you mean you got parents?" And the way it's said, it's like a gut punch. Because these kids, in my opinion, were created by the controllers. Their spark of life, their soul, which we're going to get into, was given to them by God. But they were put out after the mud floods. They were put out on the streets all over the world to work these cities, to be slaves, to work the factories, to give birth to more slaves. So let's get into
I just want to clarify what you're saying here, because are you talking about, I hear what you're saying, what's his name? Yeldabaoth. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Created these bodies like really just in physical form, but without the spark of life, because we know that the controllers cannot create, they replicate.
Yeah.
Or so they'll invert everything. Absolutely. So if we're looking now, we're seeing a lot of stuff on these false wombs that are currently being created, right? Now, this is supposed to be such high-tech, state-of-the-art stuff that's happening for incubator babies and these tiny babies, and they're giving you obviously all the song and dance that go with that. But are you saying that 100 years ago, they had the same system going with the incubator babies that we were seeing? I mean, I agree with you, because Tartaria shows us that existed, and that those are photographs. And I mean, that's pretty well documented that existed. But to me, I agree. It's always been a question mark as to how did those babies get there? So you're saying basically, according to, and especially the Apocryphon of John, which, by the way, I was just looking on my phone now, so I hope anyone didn't think I was being rude, but I wanted to Google it. There is a PDF on it.
Yeah. I have the PDF. I don't have a copy of it. I just pulled off the PDF. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, maybe Morné, who's in the back room, if you can find that link, Morné. I mean, I have it here, but for me to send it now is just a nightmare.
I mean, the Apocryphon is brilliant. I mean, I always encourage everybody to read everything. And that's just part of it. And to me, and I had, like I said, I had studied this a long time ago before Tartarian, but when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, this is in the Apocryphon of John. And I'm not saying that Yaldabaoth himself created our ancestors, but the Lucies who worship Yaldabaoth knew how to do this. And that's what started Gog and Magog. So they took the DNA from the Tartarians that had been wiped out with the mud flood and created these incubator babies and indoctrinated us to be in their system. And we know that the World's Fairs was an indoctrination center. That's where they demonstrated the incubator babies. And that was an indoctrination system to have Americans believe. I mean, in this book right here, hold on one second, a history book from the 1800s that I got in Putnam, Connecticut, from the 1800s. It says that it's an American history book that the Native Americans were of all races. So there are white people here, there were black people here. So if you're that kind of, so of course they had to change that up.
If you go to Africa as well, and I want to just add to that, you look at pictures that are there in the Congo, right? And the Congo is by far the richest country in Africa minerally. You're looking at pictures from the 1400s, right? You're seeing that there were black kings and were like being bowed down to by Caucasians, right? They had these incredible factories, libraries, universities, canal systems, right? So even in Africa, we've kind of been given this perspective of what Africa is and, has been in history type thing. But really, when you're looking and you're digging, you're seeing that all over, as you're saying, from the south, when the Native Americans, it wasn't just one race.
No,
Same with Africa. It certainly wasn't just one race. Maybe originally, yes, I agree. But at that stage, there was definitely not just deep, dark Africa that was running that had savages running around, because that's really what we've been taught.
Well, let's think about that. If they were to teach us that as American kids, that the Native Americans were all races, then they couldn't run with this narrative, white man bad, white man conqueror. They can't run with that, because if and that's what I'm saying with these indoctrinations. So if people were put on these continents from these incubators, and then they were sent into these indoctrination camps called the World's Fair, they were sold a story to believe that was going to eventually pan out at this time period. I hope that makes sense, to have races fighting each other. When I believe the 12 tribes of Israel are 12 galactic tribes, and that's all our DNA is showing where our galactic heritage is. It's not even from this earth. And so it's if we realize that we as races that we are all on the same team, well, the controllers can't have that, can they? They need us fighting each other so we don't see what they're doing. But these street kids, I mean, that's literally, and that's what I said in my video, like as an American, this was happening all over the world, but for this particular strike in New York, as an American, we are taught that our ancestors came over here on boats for religious freedom, but that, according to Tartarian, is just simply not true. So it shows us that these are actually our ancestors, were these incubator babies, these street kids. And this story is so fantastic that for me, being a descendant, potentially a descendant of one of these kids, is unbelievable. And it's a note of pride, because we're going to talk about what these 8-year-old kids, I cannot stress this enough. My nephew is 10. And he is a very smart child, but I don't think he would know how to do any of this. And nor should a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old have to do this. But this is what was happening at this time, because these Lucies, these controllers, don't understand the preciousness. They understand the preciousness of a child as far as wanting its soul, but they don't understand the concern that a normal person with the spirit. So these bodies we're living in at this time were created by these incubators using the DNA of the Tartarians, but the spirit inside of us, our Purusha, is ours. And it was created by God. And that's what we're going to see happen. So the child strike of 1899 started off with the newsboys. They were called Newsies. And so this lasted from July 18th to August 2nd of 1899. At the turn of the century, newspapers would deliver in the morning, and in the afternoon. Now, they say the morning edition was dropped off at subscribers' houses, but the afternoon edition was hawked by Newsies. And you guys know the term, I think it's a world term now, extra, extra, read all about it. Extra, extra, read all about it. This is where this comes from, the Newsies. So the Newsies, these little 8-year-old kids would hold the newspaper up and read extra, extra, read all about it. Three-headed baby born in Queens. And you would buy, just like I had to buy this book in order to read it, the people will buy the newspaper in order to read it. And so they say the modern day controller information says that the kids would sell the afternoon edition. They were immigrant after school to help their parents. None of these, but if you go back and look at all the archived evidence, none of these children were in school. Please. The controllers don't give a shit. They didn't give a shit whether these kids were. They were working in factories all day. They were not in school. Most of the Newsies did know how to read, and we'll get to how I think they were taught how to read. It was basically to save their jobs for the most part. But so in the movie and in the play, it shows them getting up at the crack of dawn to go hawk newspapers. And I think the movie and the play is telling you the truth because it's Disney. They have to tell you the truth. But they're guising it as entertainment. Okay. And so the Newsy kids would buy 100 paper for 50 cents. Now, I don't know what that is in today's money, but I assume 50 cents was quite a reasonable price back then. And then they would sell each paper for a penny. So they would double their profit, right? And if they did this point, if they couldn't sell all their papers, then they would have to eat the difference. So they couldn't give the paper back. They couldn't sell. They would have to just eat the difference. And because the newspapers were released every day, it's not like they could sell it later, right? And this is where we also, in YouTube, in the internet world, there's a term called clickbait that some people will use. And it's having a very fantastic title to get people to click on your video. These kids were the original clickbaiters. They were the original clickbaiters. They would come up with these crazy stories to get people to buy their newspapers, which I don't blame them. I mean, half these kids didn't even have damn shoes on, and it was New York City. They needed the money. These were 8-year-old. I can't stress this enough. These were 8-year-old kids who were supporting themselves. Okay? They were supporting themselves. All right. So what happened to cause this strike? Well, they say, history tells us, allegedly, I'm not so sure about anything anymore, that the year before we had the Spanish-American War. When the Spanish-American War had happened, Joseph Pulitzer, as in the Pulitzer Prize, who owned the World newspaper, and William Hearst, who owned the Journal, upped the Newsies price for 100 newspapers for 60 cents instead of 50. But the Newsies didn't mind it at this point because a war was going on. So they could sell their papers, no big deal. Then once the war was over, it went back to 50 cents. Well, randomly, Joseph Pulitzer and William Hearst, I've been to the Hearst Castle. Patty Hearst, who's one of the descendants who was Stockholm Syndrome, big families here in the United States, big super families in media. I believe they're Lucy families. That's just my opinion. But Joseph Pulitzer decided he wanted to make even more money, so he was going to up the price of newspapers again for the Newsies. So he's demanding more money from these 8-year-old kids, 60 cents per 100 papers. And again, they have to eat the difference if they can't sell the papers. And the Newsies freaked the fuck out, which I don't blame them. These kids, it was like, you know, if you like poke a bear too much, it eventually will, or if you whack a horse too much, it'll eventually buck you off. This is what happened. So these kids got so pissed off. Now, remember, they always have this threat of the asylums. And they talk about this in the movie and the play, where they're trying not to be picked up and be sent to these asylums. This is a huge this huge topic that's talked about in these plays. But they were so pissed off, they said no. And so they went on strike. So the first thing that happened was on July 18th, 1899 in Long Island City, which is a borough of Queens. So there's different neighborhoods in New York. I think most people get that. In big cities, they have different neighborhoods. So different Newsy kids were responsible for different neighborhoods. So it started in Queens, where I laugh saying this. I just can't imagine the wagons that would come in to drop the newspapers off every morning at the distribution for the kids. A group of 8-year-old kids ran and pushed the wagon over. Can you imagine a group of 8-year-old chain smoking kids
Wow.
Pushing a wagon over. I mean, and you guys can see they have, I don't know if I sent any of the, there, you can actually see they have some photographs of the papers flying everywhere and kids throwing them in the water, and they're so pissed. And this was against the World, which again was owned by William Hearst, and the Journal that was owned by, Joseph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer and William Hearst. So the next day, the Newsies from Manhattan and Brooklyn did the same thing. So kids all over New York. Now let me reiterate. This is 1899. There's no cell phone. There's no Twitter. These little kids were running from borough to borough, spreading the word. And they decided that they were going to form a union. Now, in my opinion, unions today ain't nothing but government-controlled agencies. But in this time, unions were important. And they didn't fill out any paperwork. I mean, there's a song in the play of the movie that says, we ain't got no paperwork and badges, but we're a union because we say so. That's what I'm saying, Melissa. I think that we're the Newsies. I mean, there's a whole song in the beginning called Carrying the Banner. It's a fine life carrying the banner, carrying the newspapers. What are we doing on YouTube? We're carrying the banner. We are essentially doing what they started in 1899. So now at first, this strike was very violent. These little 8-year-old kids were, and I don't blame them, like they were living hard lives. And he thought anyone found selling the boycotted newspapers would be mobbed and beaten. So you got a gang of 8-year-old, chain-smoking 8-year-olds, cocaine-using, chain-smoking 8-year-olds who are like sitting outside, these distribution offices, like ready to deck someone to come in and undersell them with the newspapers. It got so bad, you guys. It got so bad that Joseph Pulitzer was also terrified of these kids. So he hired full-grown men to hawk the papers and promised them police protection. But you know what happened? These brilliant, cheeky little 8-year-olds would distract the police and then beat up the man. So all of a sudden, the grown men were like, we're not doing this. We're not selling these papers.
Well, gangsters.
They were little gangsters. They knew it. They were like middle finger up to the controllers. So it started to spread. And there ended up being on July 24th, 1899, a rallying at Irving Hall. Now, Irving Hall doesn't exist anymore in New York, but Irving Hall's, it sat on the corner of Irving Place and 15th Street in the Union Square of Manhattan. It was built in 1888, 11 years before, as a German language theater, a Yiddish theater, and a burlesque house. Now, I say burlesque house because they cover this also in the movie and in the play, The Burlesque House. These boys were frequents at this. They would hang out at the burlesque house, with all the scandalous ladies of the night. But what became apparent is that these scandalous ladies of the night, were the closest thing to a mother that these children had. These women protected these children. Protected them. When the cops would be chasing them to try to put them in asylums, the women would bring them into the burlesque house and have them hide out in the burlesque house. And I think these women are the ones that taught them how to read. I really do think these women, I think these women played you see this in the story of Oliver Twist from Charles Dickens over in London with the character of Nancy Sykes. Nancy Sykes was a prostitute, but she was the one who took care of those boys. She was the mother. She ended up giving her life for Oliver, to save Oliver, right? So you see these women of the night in this time that are actually showing some sort of parental guidance to these kids, and these kids were able to use this burlesque hall in 1899 to have their rally. Now, the strike leader was this is great. These names are great. The strike leader was a kid named Kid Blink. And you can actually find old pictures of him. I don't know. And I'm going to sell some of the other names too, because they obviously were named. I mean, nothing shouts incubator babies more than their names, because these are names that kids would definitely name themselves. Now, the union president was a normal name, a kid by the name of David Simmons, and they got this rally together. Now, at this point, they started now, Pulitzer, I literally laughed out loud when I first read this in my research, because You can't teach an old dog new tricks, and the media is still pulling the same shit today. Pulitzer put an X-nay. Like, you could not, no newspaper, the Tribune, no newspaper were allowed to report on this strike. Pulitzer said, so they had a media blackout when it came to reporting on this strike. Okay? So
even back then, still.
These little kids were dealing with the same. I will be 40 in over a little over a month. As a 40-year-old woman, I am dealing with the same censorship that these 8-year-old children did, and these 8-year-old children had way more gumption, way more courage, way more bravado than I think I do today, because they were like, oh, you know, I get kind of down and out about it, like, oh, it's so sad there's censorship. These kids were like, fuck you. This is our city. Because I think the kids understood at that point that it started to spread. So it started off as the newsboy strike, and then it started to spread to the factories, the slaughterhouses, all of these labor-intensive companies, these factories that were running the city of New York, were all run off of the backs. And there's a line in one of the songs, they talked about children polishing the shoes when they don't have shoes themselves. Like, this is what's happening. This is blood, sweat, and tears. And so all of a sudden, all these kids around New York started going, oh shit, we're striking too. So the slaughterhouses shut down, the seamstress, the factories, they all shut down, and the kids all went on strike. It started as the Newsies strike, and it turned into the children's strike. So kids all over, it makes me emotional, like kids all over New York said no. And at this rally on July 4th, 1899, all of a sudden, these adults in New York started to support the children. The adults that actually have a conscience, who themselves are probably incubator babies too, started to see what was going on and started to support the children. So at this rally, they had senators speaking, they had local business people speaking, and at the end, David Simmons made a list of demands, and that was basically, we will work for you, but you will treat us as valued members of your company. And he had this list of demands. Now let me read off the names of all the other kids who spoke, just because this is just fantastic. So one of the kids to speak was a kid called Workhorse Brennan. Another was called Bob the Indian. One was Racetrack Higgins, who was head of the Brooklyn gang. Hungry Joe Keenan. He was one. Hungry Joe Keenan led them in a final song. I mean,
oh wow, that's amazing.
You cannot, like, maybe if I ever have a kid, I'll let my niece and nephew name the kid, because these names are brilliant. Like, Bob the Indian, like, what? That is what a kid would name himself, right? And Kid Blink. Kid Blink had an eye patch. He only had one eye, so that's why I named it. I'm Kid Blink, yo. I'm the Newsies. We're you know, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So
great, interesting question, yeah. About the girls, and I actually wanted to ask that earlier on when we saw the photographs. I was particularly looking for girls. So, what were the girls dressed as boys?
You can see, so they talk about the girls. There was a girl named Annie Hall who was also big in the rally as well. Actually, it's kind of sweet. So you'll see pictures of the girls. Some of them are in dresses. Some of them are dressed as boys, but you can tell they're girls. The boys, they always talk about the boys because the boys took care of the girls. The boys would not let the girls, they protected the little girls. And I think that's very sweet. I was reading that, and we're talking 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. And we're talking, so obviously there was a conscience, a moral code there where they would never let the girls get close to violence. They really protected them. And they saw each other as family. I think y'all showed the picture of them all sleeping together on the streets. They would huddle together like a puppy pile, like puppies do, and sleep together. Mm-hmm. They were each other's family. And you see this. I mean, like I said, I've literally, I keep renting the play on YouTube. I think I'm just going to buy the play. It's fantastic. I mean, the music and dancing is unbelievable. If you want to see some very talented people.
What is it?
The Newsies Broadway play. It's on YouTube. You can buy it or rent it, and I highly suggest everybody rent it. Again, I love theater anyway, and the dancing is unbelievable. The music, the difference between, now this is interesting. The difference between the movie from 1992 and the play is the journalist. So there is a character in the movie that Bill Pullman plays who is a rogue journalist who start to write about the Newsboys. But in the play, they turned that character into a female character. And she goes, and it kind of gets into the women's right that are coming around as well for women's rights. She's trying to be a journalist. And you find out through the play that she's actually the daughter of Joseph Pulitzer. And so they kind of are giving a nod. And at the end of the play, they're putting all these flyers out. And William Hearst's son, the son of the Tribune, and Catherine Pulitzer, these three kids of these controllers, actually break into Pulitzer's office and use his printing press to help the street kids get their message out. So they're kind of nodding to that there are whistleblowers. That's kind of how I took it. Like they're showing these kids that have these last names that are siding with the children and siding against their families. And of course, I think about people like Jesse Zaboter, all these people who have come out of these families who carry these last names but are standing with the people. That's what these characters did in the play. They stood with the kids against their own family. And so I thought that was interesting that Disney decided to go with that, because in my research, Pulitzer did have a daughter named Catherine, but she died as a child of pneumonia. And I couldn't find any evidence that any of the kids of Hearst or Pulitzer actually helped the Newsboys. I didn't find any evidence that was actually a true thing that happened, but I thought it was interesting that Disney opted to do that, because I think they are showing us that there are people who are tattletaling on their own families. So yes, there were children. They were very much, the females were girls in this. They were very much protected by the boys. A lot of girls in this time though worked in slaughterhouses and seamstress shops. So a lot of the girls were put into the factories. The Newsies were predominantly boys, but there were a few girls that were protected by the Newsies. Yes, absolutely. So on August 1 of 1899, basically Pulitzer and Hearst were brought to their knees because the whole city of New York stopped. All because of Pulitzer and Hearst. And we know
what date you said up?
Sorry?
What date to say that date again?
August 1 of 1899. Yes. They came to a compromise. And they met with the union leaders. And so some of the compromise for the kids in factories was to correct some of the dangerous conditions in the factories. And we're going to get into like what kind of evolved out of this. And for the Newsies, they agreed. So the biggest thing they got was they kept the price for the newspapers at 60 cents for 100 papers. However, if the Newsies couldn't sell all of their papers, the publisher had to buy the old papers back. So it ended up being a better deal for the kids. All right. And after they got what they wanted, their union disbanded. I think that's awesome. Like they never had any permits. They never had paperwork. They were like, we're just a union because we say so. And the minute
they were respected because now people knew you don't stuff around with the kids. I love this because, as you're talking, I so see that is so appropriate for these times as well. I love to bring it all together.
Yeah.
And it is so, the kids were speaking to us then. Yes. And, through bringing up these historical events, again, that have been so obscured from our vision, literally, it's kind of like, the kids are speaking. The kids are saying, stuff it, stand up, don't allow this to happen, stand up. And as one of the viewers was saying, this is probably our grandparents, our
yes.
great-grandparents. I would love to actually know if there are any of our viewers who do have maybe grandparents or even, I don't know if parents, I think parents would be a little bit old now, but that are directly connected to this New York kids strike. I would love to know if someone has.
There were over 7,000 kids at that rally. 7,000 kids were in a building that could probably only hold about 300 people.
So does someone have a story of their grandpa being one of these kids, or their
descendant of Kid Blink or Workhouse?
Yes. I would love to hear from Kid Blink's great-grandkids,
If I found out he was my great-great-great, whatever, I'd be like, that's badass.
Like, Indian.
Bob the Indian, yes. I'd be like, my great-great-great, whatever granddad was a chain-smoking, coke-using Newsie who brought Joseph Pulitzer and William Hurt to their fucking knees. Like, if you
I
could
think it is so cool. And these are the stories that really need to be shared because it's so inspiring to think that our kids, I mean, okay, they were completely, the world was different. I mean, they were hard, they were tough, they were streetwise, you know, they were born into a very different life experience to what our really mostly spoiled, and I'm not talking about obviously kids at a disadvantage, but I'm just talking about the normal average kid, you know, spoiled, get your technology, do whatever. These were kids, and I really think there's such a beautiful message in that for us today. You know, it's really the kids, let the kids not take shit. The kids have learned, and you know what? It's such a beautiful example that because what's occurring to me now is that kids will learn from their parents. So children learn fear from generations. So there's generational fear, there's generational health issues that are passed down. These kids knew nothing about fears of their parents, boy. They just went out there and did it and decided, well, this is our life, we've got to do it. So we're going to actually make things happen. So they didn't learn fear from their parents, actually, which is a good thing.
And I just, so Shanti and whoever's in the background, I just put a link in the private chat for us, a link to the YouTube, where you can rent the Broadway musical. If you guys want to put that into the, I don't know how to put it into the main chat, because I would love for everybody to watch this and take notes and see if you notice anything, because it's fantastic. And yes, and well, here's the thing too. So 1899, after this happened, 14 years later, on December 23rd, 1913, is when Woodrow Wilson, in the middle of the night, signed in the Federal Reserve Act, which we know the Federal Reserve Act is not about banks. It is really about our educational system for the world. So they realized they couldn't control us through our DNA, so they were going to start to control us through our mind. And this is when we see child labor law. Listen, the freaking Lucy's don't give a shit if your kid is working in dangerous conditions or not. They created child labor laws and laws about education to get people into school systems to indoctrinate them so that we wouldn't figure this out.
Exactly.
The gas station.
That was cool. Getting closer. That's lovely. I would love to hear these stories. I think that is so amazing.
I mean, we have to. I know I've gotten a lot of people on my channel know that they're descendants of kids on orphan trains. But I really, really want to find somebody. There has to be somebody out there. I mean, with 7,000 Newsies alone, probably 25,000 kids altogether, there's got to be somebody out there watching right now that's a descendant of one of these kids.
Totally. I'd love to hear. Love to hear from you guys. If you are, email me, please. I'm going to put my email in the chat. So if there's anyone, or Brice as well, but we'll just it's info at Chantelle Meyburgh, I think, right? Chantelle Meyburgh. Yeah, if there's anyone, let us know. We would love to do a follow-up on that. ChantelleMeyburgh.com. I think that's my email.
More. I mean, I've been, and when I did this, so many people commented in on my channel about, oh, the same thing happened in this country, the same. So this was obviously, I think the controllers really thought they were going to be able to control us through DNA manipulation, where they couldn't. All of a sudden the kids, that's what I want to express too, like that spark of life that made these kids go no and fight back against it was a David and Goliath story, 100%.
Totally.
And these kids, that spark of life that was in those kids, that's in us too. That's in us too. It's the same spark of life. And if those kids can do it, we're brought in from farms to work. Yeah, probably. I mean, down here, Angie, our friend that was on with the Blue People, she was telling me, my family, I know I do have ancestors who are from New York. I have a couple of ancestors who are from New York. Allegedly, they came through Ellis Island. Who knows? Funny story, because majority of my family is from the Southeast. We didn't learn about our ancestors from the North because they were Yankees. So my parents never taught us about that. But I know most of my family comes from the low country of South Carolina, which is the coast, is where Charleston is. And Angie was telling me that there are stories of children who white kids. These are white kids who showed up on the coast of South Carolina, no parents, and they would chuck oysters. That's what they did, was they were chucking oysters. Are these also? Probably, but it made such a huge impact in New York because it's New York, right? New York has been, even though it's a lot smaller then than it is now, it was always a huge metropolitan. There was a huge place, right? So the fact that they were able to shut it down, and I guarantee you, you look at all the workhouses in London, you look at everything going on around the world, these kids were doing quite a job to push back against the controllers. Yeah, River Phoenix, Stand By Me. Yes. Yeah. Melissa says the controllers were like, shit, failed again. I know, right? That's kind of funny, right? That's why I was cracking up doing this research, reading about gangs of 8-year-olds. Like, can you just imagine? Like, seriously, guys. And you can find, there is some film footage, the old films from that, where but you see them, like, the kids, like, fighting each other and, like, kind of like, but can you imagine? Like, you're driving your wagon full of your newspapers to take them to the distribution location, and all of a sudden this gang of 8-year-olds chain smoking cigars.
But it's funny because this really is food for thought, because when you're looking at a lot of these old movies, these not old movies, but when they have scenes from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, even, in those like mafiosa days when the mafia ruled the streets. There were plenty of these little kids running around, plenty that were used by the mafia bosses as runners, as all sorts of things. One never questioned where they came from,
right?
And you just assume they're just orphans. And but it makes a lot of sense.
Freaking wild is, they tell us we do have such a surge, and the Tartarian guy covers this, like, you do have such a surge of orphans at this time, and we just never, we were told, the controllers told us that it was because of the Victorian age, and that if a woman had a child out of wedlock, she was basically screwed, so she would give her baby up to these workhouses. Well, okay, maybe I could say for a few kids that might have been the case, but the number of children that were around the world that were orphaned, shit's not adding up. It's just not mathematically possible for all of these children just to be whoopsies by a young 16-year-old woman. Like, that means that every woman on the planet would have had to, like, given up like 10 to 20 kids. It's just not, it's not possible.
Exactly. And every single woman would have had to be a scandalous woman that was sleeping around with according to them, that was out of wedlock or through extramarital activities. It's crazy. There's just no ways, and no one has really asked the questions up until now, which is amazing. So,
and I said that's the thing we learn about this rule of consent, which is what everybody has to play by. And the dark side of this, they have loopholes, or they think they have loopholes that they can lie to us, but also tell us the truth at the same time. And if we don't pick up on it, if we don't, then they don't have to pay the karma back, because at least they told us. So are they telling us the truth through things like the movie Newsies, the play Newsies, and we just didn't pick up on it? And now we're starting to go, hold on a minute, shit's not adding up. It is, and I really encourage. I know the link is now I would say watch the Broadway play over the movie. The Broadway play is way better than the movie, and just. It's a fabulous story. Again, I cry watching it, just seeing, and it is adult men playing these kids, obviously, because the demands of theater. Listen, theater actors, they're a whole different level of athletes. They are dancing straight for 4 hours, singing at the same time. So obviously, they have to have adults play these parts. But the lyrics are so telling. The story is very powerful, and I think they would assume that they're telling us the truth. But we think that it's just entertainment, and please remember when you're watching this movie or the play that even though these are grown-ass men playing these characters that are supposed to be sold as teenagers, the true story is these were like 8-year-olds. And it's funny because I've watched I've watched a lot of the interviews with the actors who played these parts on Broadway and their interpretation of what they're portraying on stage. And a lot of them have said, we understand that these were 8-year-old children. Like, we understand we're playing in the play, we're playing like 15, 16-year-olds, but we understand that these kids were like really 8 years old, and when they did this. And that is so freaking, never underestimate the power of a child, because that is so freaking unbelievable that they did that. I mean, who scares Joseph Pulitzer the most? 8-year-old kids obviously do. So
a gang of them too, and they're obviously a whole lot street smarter than the rest. I'm interested, I would love to, because again, now the adults from that era that were doing these things to the kids, where did they come from? Were they also street kids?
I think I don't know. We don't know everything, guys. I think, yes, that the adults that stood with the kids, I think that some of them might have been made as adults and put, I don't know. I don't know. And the Apocryphon of John, he creates adults, not kids. So I do think they have the ability to make adults and put the soul into the body. And of course, our souls, I think we all, I think it gets even deeper, because I do believe that we made the agreement to come back into these bodies for this time, as circling back to Atlantis and all that kind of stuff. But you look at the Bible, it's Gog and Magog. We're in Gog and Magog right now, and all is fair in love and war. And so we are in a war, and these 8-year-old kids fought diligently in that war. And I wish that they were still alive today to tell us. Maybe some of us are reincarnates of these kids. I don't know, but I feel I'm very proud. If I could talk to one of these kids today, I would definitely give them a huge hug, fix them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And
I would definitely give that kid a bells, boy. That kid deserves a bells.
Yes.
A good old whiskey and a good old cigar.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I'd be like, you deserve that cigar. I'm not even going to say anything. You enjoy. I mean, that picture of the 3 kids smoking those cigars that's quite a badass picture. Those are kids that I would never want to go up again. I mean, look at them. They're probably like, 9, 10 years old. Look, and one kid's got like a black eye. I'm sorry. I fear those kids more than I fear a lot of adults. You don't mess with those kids. Those kids are gangster. But I think that those are our ancestors across the world. These were kids. And just because this particular event happened in New York City doesn't mean that these same children are children like these kids were not also around the world, being trying to be controlled by the controllers and fighting back and pushing back. And there was one picture I found, I don't think I sent it to you guys, where the kids, when their strike sign said, "We would rather be in school." So these kids understood to an extent that their lives were a little bit harder than other kids, but they weren't in school because they were having to work to feed themselves, and they were trying to escape the asylum. So I would love you too, Shanti, and I would love for you guys all to watch the play, watch it, see if you pick up on anything. That Kara Lindsay is the girl who plays Catherine Pulitzer in the play. She's phenomenal. She's got a beautiful voice. Jeremy Jordan plays Jack Kelly, the main kid in the play. He's phenomenal. Just a phenomenal cast anyway. You see the burlesque house, all that kind of stuff. And the energy, like I said, in the play and in the movie, it's high dance, it's high gymnastics. They flip on stage the whole time, but it carries that. It has to be, right? Like, you couldn't do a play over this without having it that way, because these were 8-year-old kids. I mean, my nephew, one time I walked into my sister's house. You walk into her house, there's a stairwell that goes upstairs and like a banister of a little walkway up front. And I walked in, my sister had just had her 3rd child, so she wasn't watching Charlie. Charlie had literally monkey crawled all the way up and was hanging on the banister. Like, if he had dropped, he probably would have broken his leg. And I walked in, I was like, but that's kids, right? That's what kids do. They're high energy. And so the play has to have that element of the flips and the toe touches and the high dancing, because these are children. One of the songs is called "Who's the King in New York," and I put that on mine as a little subtitle, "Who's the King in New York," because, and this is when they've started to make breaking, like people were starting to know what they were doing, and it's a whole number about Pulitzer isn't the king of New York. We're the king of New York. We're shutting New York down, and so we need that fire as quote unquote, true, whatever you want to call us, as a community. We're carrying the banner. We're royalty of this planet, not the controllers. We are.
And it's interesting that it's pretty much a century now if we're going, when was it?
1899.
Yeah,
and then the
until
Federal Reserve Act was 1913.
Exactly. So it's round about now, right? Literally
Yeah.
a century ago that this is coming up. Very, very interesting timing. Joel has left a very interesting comment here, which I think is, how about, and she says, yeah, how about the 17-year-old fighter pilots in World War II?
Yep.
Very, very interesting that. And, with that, I have to say, when we're hearing all about the stuff that they've been training these child soldiers and things, but they would have definitely been doing MK Ultra and stuff like that in World War II.
Yeah, I think it probably got even worse after this. I think this 1899, somebody put in, they were like, oh shit, with the 18, because we fought back. And so that's when we see the implication of the Federal Reserve with the indoctrination. Children now had to go to school. So they're using these MK Ultra tactics to try to control our minds because they couldn't control our spirit. And I know Angie just said one of my ancestors made it their last name Arlington. Makes me wonder. Yeah, because listen, I'm going to go on a mission to find workhorse Brennans and Bob the Indians. I want to know if are you like Sally the Indian now? Like, how did that work? Like, are you one of their descendants? Because how freaking cool would be like, yeah, Bob the Indian. That's my.
Kid Blink. I'm looking for Kid Blink. That's the one I'm looking for.
I love these names. Oh, what was it? Hungry Higgins, the guy who. It's just fantastic. I'm like, these names are freaking fantastic, and it's so what a kid would name themselves. Like, this is no grown up is naming their kid Kid Blink or Workhorse Higgins. Like,
and these kids were not having any grown up name them either.
No. Oh, honey, listen. Those 8-year-olds, I don't think a grown up would try to name them. They'd be like, it's fine. That's fine.
We're all good. We're all good.
You write that on your birth certificate. That's great. So.
That's hilarious. Wow. What a super, super, super awesome show today. And I would really love to hear back from our viewers, please. If there is anyone who, get some very, very interesting comments here as well. Someone is saying, Angie as well, yes, made up their last name, Arlington. Makes me wonder if he was one of these kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would look further into that if I were you. If you can research your family tree as much as what it can take you there, because it would be very, very interesting. And you know what? Just think about what that would do for us, right? If I discovered my great-grandpa was Kid Blink, you better believe I'd be Kid Blinking all over Soros right now.
I would have like frame pictures up. And somebody just asked, after these kids did all of that, what happened to all of them? They just continued working. They got what they wanted, and they got married, had children of their own, lived their lives. Of course, the government stopped. Again, after this happened, the government went, oh, shit. And basically picked up the pace and created the Federal Reserve Act and all that kind of stuff to start. They created, they say, wink, wink, this is what created the child labor laws. But no, the child labor laws, I think, were a manipulation to try to control people. They realized their original plan was to create us as slaves and that we would just work in these factories and keep their cities and their towns running and keep them poor. But they realized with this that this could not, Cheryl, they don't have families.
Yeah, no one knows where that's what we were talking about. We really think they could be the incubator babies.
Yeah, they don't have
Yeah. I wanted to say something now, but it slipped my mind. But I'll think about it just now. But very, very interesting. Wow.
Yeah. If Billy the Kid was a Newsie, maybe we hear all those. Yeah, that might be. I'm not from the Midwest, but all the Midwesterners who have the Billy the Kid stories, all those stories, maybe look into that. That could very well be a kid from she said no if they got married. Oh yeah. Oh, you mean their families now, Cheryl? Like, yeah. Well, that's the thing, because then we have the World's Fair, right? So that's what I'm thinking, because with like 25,000 kids shutting down New York City, you would think that somebody would be like, yeah, that was my great whatever. But we had all these World's Fair that came in that was an indoctrination. And so I'm thinking, my hypothesis is that a lot of people who are descendants of these kids don't know they are descendants of these kids. They were taught.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Interesting, because when you say they obviously would have ended this child labor. That's when the laws were created. And wouldn't that be interesting? Because then I would imagine they would have created these kids' homes and these kids' reformatories.
And orphanages and foster homes, and because they have these asylums. And I'm going to tell you guys, these asylums, they were labeled as the home for the friendless or whatever, but they were freaking juvie jails. They were death camps for these kids. Yeah. And it was kids who, and you see this in the play. They talk about this in the play. They're constantly running from the authorities that are going to put them in these asylums. The kids were very well aware that these asylums were not good things, and that most of their friends who got arrested and thrown into one did not come out alive. So that they were very aware of these things. So it's interesting how then the controllers had to go about and redesign their whole system to now manipulate this even more. So,
you know, child labor is alive and well in
absolutely
India, China, Thailand, Africa. I'm pretty damn sure in the States as well. You know, we just look at what's going on. I mean, when we're looking at the whole adoptions, the forced adoptions on the Australia channel. I mean, the Australian, the lady I speak to, she was put into the charcoal pits and sex trafficked and gosh knows what all else, you know. And she had a club foot, so she was a B grade child. They get graded according to their physical abilities and stuff like that. It's insane. It's insane.
See that there's a character. There's a character in the play in the movie called Crutchy. He's one of the kids, and he has a bum foot. And he is the most paranoid about being picked up by the asylums because he's handicapped. And you see the beginning of the play opens. He is sleeping on a rooftop with the main kid, Jack. And he's trying to get up super early to get there first to get his papers so he can make enough money so he's not taken in by the asylums. And so they talk about that with kids. And you see the kids, all the kids kind of defend him and look out for him because he has a bum leg. Anyway, so I really encourage you guys, please sit down, watch this play. It's like $3.99 to rent on YouTube, super cheap. Watch it and let me know if you picked up on anything in this play, because it's done by Disney. Disney's part of the bad guys, but they have to tell us
what they're doing. Remember, they're always showing us in plain sight. They will maybe add their little frills and what have you, but the basic story, the core of it, will be the truth.
100%. That's the best place to go to find the truth, is to their stuff.
And when you're looking at even the Disney cartoons and stuff, and I don't know if you've seen some of that Disney stuff, you actually see how Mickey Mouse has an erection.
Yeah.
And actually masturbating. When you start looking at it, and when it's obviously, it's insane. So it's showing you all the time Mickey's a pedo. Yeah. And did you see the picture where Mickey takes off his ears and he's this bald, creepy old guy? Oh, so gross. Yes. And then he puts his ears on, and then he's Mickey Mouse again. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. This obsession with kids has been going on since forever. And the abuse of children has been going on since forever. And I really, honestly, if you guys have any more information on personal stories, you know, anything like this, I would love to do another show as well, just going deeper into this.
Yes. I want to know too, because I had some people, if you come from another country where you know something like this happened in your country as well, send me that information. Because y'all, this isn't just about New York City. I think we know this by now. This isn't just about countries. This is about us. And I really do think we are the descendants of these kids. And I want everybody to understand, again, there's a song called Carrying the Banner in the play. That is what we are doing now. We are carrying the banner. We are moving forward. In our day, our banner is YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. But we carry what those kids did should be motivation for us, because we are their descendants. We are carrying their message, and we are fighting the exact same controllers that they were fighting.
Yep. Brave hearts. Wow. Well, we look forward to finding out more about that, because that for me is something that can be very, very interesting to start digging up as well. Wow. Really, really great show. want to say thank you to all our viewers for watching, supporting. Really love to chat about these things. Brice, is there anything else from your side that you want to say before we call it a day?
I just want everybody to know that we're all in this, just like those kids were all for one and one for all. That's what one of the lines from the songs is, wrongs will be righted if we're united. We have to stay united. That was their thing. The kids were like, we stay together, we stick together. And I think that's what that's the message that the kids are reminding us with bringing this story back. And I do think God is the one that brought the story back, because I am a huge lover of Broadway. And one morning I was just watching some Broadway clips, and one of the performances from the 2012 Tony Awards popped up, and I was like, I haven't thought about this story in a long time. And I went back and started studying, and everything started connecting the dots. So I do think God, or the spirit of these kids, put that clip in my view so that we could resurrect their story, because we are them and they are us. We are those badass kids. Absolutely. Now everybody's going to start smoking cigars and renaming themselves to Workhouse Higgins. And
Exactly. Wow, I love it. I love it. Yo, that doesn't mean now your little 8-year-old suddenly got to go get badass and start chain smoking, although it'd be quite cute if he's got a little attitude like that. I think we should get our little gangster kids up in arms, and yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Guys, it's such a pleasure. Love it. God bless you all. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas. And wow, we are like literally 2 or 3 days away from 2023. Wow. I hope that this coming year is blessed, blessed, blessed. We have done so much waking up. We have done so much learning. And Brice, thank you for how you've contributed to our channel as well.
Oh,
you know,
of
we
course.
love you, and it's such fun shows to have you on twice a week. Love it. And just sharing knowledge and just taking this journey together. Really amazing. Thanks, everybody. We will see you. I'm not sure when. We're just taking a few days off here and there, but we'll let you know when we're on again. God bless you all. Take good care. Bye-bye.